Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Kristen and I'm here to review books. This is my August monthly wrap-up, which honestly, I'm going to preface by saying I was in a book slump. I've been in a book slump from about mid-June to mid-August, so my reading stats are a little bit skewed, I will admit. This definitely was not my best month in a long it's my best month in a long time, which is sad because it's not a very good month, I don't think. But general preference out of the way, just me mentioning that yes, I was in a book slump, and so that's kind of why this is only 5 books is what I've read this month. Don't bully me. I bully myself enough. I don't need anybody to critique me, which I know, like, other people will be like, oh, you've read 5 books this month. That's still so much. That's more than the average American, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and I should do better. I'm gonna critique myself harsher than I would critique any other person. So yeah, I think I should do better. Moving on, I still read 1,862 pages, which is pretty good, I think. I mean, not amazing, but that's average about 60 pages a day. So pretty good average considering if you look at my stats, which I'll post right here for the month. Yeah, I didn't read until I didn't seriously hunker down reading until halfway through August. So my stats are gonna look like shit, okay? You don't have to tell me. I know. I was there, I lived it, I experienced it. My average book length was 386 pages, which is pretty long books, I will say. About 400 pages, that's a pretty decently sized book. My average time to finish a book was 17 days, which is not good. I think most of these books I actually finished reading in 4 days-ish, but one book took me about 2 months to read. I started it in June and I just now finished it this month, which was the book that I was mostly reading from mid-June to now, so I think that kind of also spiraled into it, but we can go into that once I'm actually discussing that book. Average rating this month was 4.4 stars, which I feel like is actually pretty high rating on average. I think I enjoyed pretty much everything that I read this month, which is saying something considering I was in a book slump and now I feel stupid for being in a book slump, so I think that's kind of why I'm more harsh on myself. But moving on to the actual books. The first book I finished this month was Uprising by Margaret Peterson Haddix. This is a historical YA fiction that follows the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fires, and for anybody who doesn't know, it was a deadly industrial fire that happened in New York City that killed 146 garment workers. The reason why this fire happened was because there was no safety features implemented for any of the workers in this. They locked stairwells, they locked certain doors and stuff like that to prevent these people from taking breaks that are needed because they overworked their employees to extreme measures where they were having all of their workers work 52 hours a week, which is 9 hours during the weekdays and then 7 days also on Saturdays. Women were majority working on this factory that they were paying them less than minimum wage. They were paying them $1 a week is how much these women were making. And they had unsafe practices due to the fact that they wanted to extract as much profit as possible out of all of these workers by exploiting their labor specifically. And I think this book, if you don't know too much about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, I think it's kind of a good introductory into it. It is YA and it's recommended, it says on the back of the book it's recommended for 12 and up, which I do think is a very fair thing, where I think as an adult I was reading this and it obviously felt a little childish, it felt weaker, and I think that's obviously because I'm not the target audience. I already knew about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, already knew about the exploitation around it, but I think what this book does a really good job is it humanizing the story. I think a lot of the times people read about things that happen in history or stories that happen in history, and that's kind of what you view them as stories. You don't remember the humanity behind them, and I think this does a great job doing that. Uprising follows 3 teen girls, 2 of them who are immigrant workers who just recently moved to America and then thus are basically forced to work at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory because they can't get jobs anywhere else. I mean, women already hardly worked. This is pre-World War I, so women already had limited jobs that weren't considered homemaking and the men providing for them or whatever may have you. And then it follows the 3rd girl, which is the daughter of a wealthy businessman, and it follows just their life and events leading up towards the fire and the aftermath. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I really love the humanization of each of these characters, that even though these three girls are fictional, this book shows the historical truths of what women would possibly have been experiencing in that time frame. And I think that's a really important thing to show, especially to young girls who would be around this age that these girls are working. I mean, the main characters, I believe, are like 15, 16, 17-ish. Teenagers that are forced to live these adult lives and do all of this extreme labor just to make money for their overlord. It's interesting to talk about how like this work is considered like no skill labor, and having no skill labor is like such a myth in society where I think every job requires some type of skill. I think this book is nice because it has positive representation of socialism, which is very hard to get in American like centric book, especially like a book written by an American. No offense, but that's something that's true. And one of the like this book I think can be extracted so much about it that I think it's possibly has more meaning to it than other books that are popularized. And I think this is such a great historical fiction that I do think more people should read. And then also Mariah and I, my friend Mariah, I have a podcast outside of this where we discuss popular books, and I think me and Mariah do a great analysis of this book, and we go into the important themes and the full depth of this book in that podcast, and I will link that below if anybody's interested in it. I think this is just overall, I think this is a super smart and nice book. It kind of left me wanting more with how like some of the character stories ended up, but I think this is overall a really good book, and I do think, especially young girls, I think most people should read this, especially if you want to learn more about like history in that way, because you can learn from fiction, and that's why I love reading so much, is that you can learn from anything that you read, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. The second book I finished this month was The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by Shannon Chakrabarti. Sorry if I said that wrong, I really don't know how to say it. Overall, I like this book, I will say that, but I do have to mention, I was talking about the book slump that I was in from mid-June to mid-August, and I don't want to say it's this book's fault that I was in that slump, but unfortunately I was in the slump where I started this book in mid-June and I did not end up finishing it until about mid-August because I did end up prioritizing it. I don't think that's any fault to this book. I don't want to say I'm not holding this book accountable. I did really like this book, but I do think that did have a significant impact on my enjoyment of this, where I don't think maybe I enjoyed it as much, where maybe here in a few years, if I reread it, I could definitely see it being a higher rating, which I'm not even saying that I gave it a bad rating. I ended up giving it 4.75 stars, so I did like this book. This is a historical fantasy fiction that follows a retired pirate. Amina al-Sirafi is like the best known, well-known pirate in the world, especially female, so that's a big thing. She's a middle-aged mother now, though, and has retired her life in piracy. She gets tracked down by one of her ex-crewmates' mothers, who basically says, hey, my granddaughter is missing, I need you to find her. It's very important to me. This is like my love, my will, my child. And Amina al-Sirafi at first is very hesitant to this, but then she gets offered an unbelievable amount of money that she feels as if she must take this offer to make sure her daughter has a positive and successful life, because money unfortunately does make it so that people are able to do the things that they love and the things that they enjoy no matter what. But also there's a little bit of Amina's ambitions that are kind of driving her to do this job. She has legends told about her, about what kind of pirate she is. And so I think it's a little bit of like her thinking she's the only one for this job, but then also her wanting a better life for her family, which I think is such a complex idea and nice overarching story to give your character. And I really do enjoy that. I ended up giving this book 4.75 stars. I loved it. I am very frustrated. I ended up letting my book slump judge and cloud my reading of this, because I feel like if I was not in a book slump, I could have easily gotten through this and loved it and probably given it 5 stars maybe even. I think it's well written, a little confusing at times, but the ending really solidified it for me. I think if you know, you know, the ending is very touching. It seems as if there's going to be more series into this book, which I feel like could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. I think it's a little bit of a weird to basically the way that this book ends up setting up the future books, like it very clearly is like this will be a 5-book series total. Like in the book there's like direct things that happen, and I feel like that's such a weird, it almost feels episodic in a way, which I think if you really enjoy that with your books, it can be more fun that way rather than being like an overarching. It almost feels like it's more of like a season of a TV show rather than it being just like one like entity with itself, which I mean, not necessarily a bad thing. I love series, I do. It's just very interesting because I feel like whenever you read other series, it's never clear on how many books are going to be within the series, but this very clearly sets up like there will be 4 things that Amina must use her piracy for to obtain. I can't give this a perfect 5 stars because it's not perfect in lots of ways. I mean, my critiques are very minor, but obviously it didn't hold my attention enough to want to pick it up and get out of my book slump. I think the best books can do that to you, where I think this one tried very hard and I think it does overall a good job. I just don't think I was in the right headspace for it, and I think I'm going to hold myself accountable for that, and I think maybe we'll find out whenever I read the second book in the series, whenever that comes out, what my true opinions are of this and whether or not it really is for me. I love the overall messaging for this, so I don't want anybody to think that I'm critiquing this in any way. I liked the story, I really did, and once I I think it was just like the first half was really slow for me, and the second half I finished much quicker because I was much more into the story, where I feel like the first half, the hook is not my favorite. So I'm thinking in the future, for future series, they'll end up working better because the hook won't, like, it already has its hooks into me. I am interested to see how the story goes, just not, I don't know. I don't know what exactly didn't work for me, and maybe one day I'll be able to fully like critique what didn't work for me, but overall I liked it. I did like the story, and I do think I want my friends to read it so I could talk about that with them. I think that's like what my main thing is with this book. The next book I read, Notes on an Execution by Dania Kafka. I think that's how you say her name. Sorry, I'm not very good at pronouncing names. I did order a physical copy. I went to a local bookstore and ordered a physical copy because I read this on my Kindle, but I want a place on my shelf. This is a literary fiction thriller. Question mark thriller is, I think, a little bit pushing it. I do think there is like a little bit of a thriller. You end up following an inmate on death row 12 hours before he's executed. I think this book does a great job. It's a very uniquely written book. You end up getting put in the shoes of the violent serial killer as he's about to die. So you end up getting told his life story through 3 women in his life: his mother, the detective who catches him, and then the twin sister of his wife. I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was a beautifully written book. It's so well thought out. It's so unique. I think this book is essentially a book club book. I'm sorry, but like, you need friends to read this just so you can have somebody to sit down and discuss this book with. There's so much layers and nuance to this book that I think is really deep and really unique, that I think it gives us a vehicle to talk about the things that are hard to talk about within American culture, the death penalty. I think that's such a complex topic here in the United States. I think it's one of the few like issues in America that's almost exactly like split 50-50, and more people, as the years go on, people are turning against the death penalty, which I think is a really important thing to see within the United States as a culture overall. Me and Mariah did do a full depth review of Notes on an Execution where we go into the spoilers and everything, which I will also link below if you are interested in that. But I do think this is most definitely my favorite book that I've read this year so far. I don't think it's as good as Babel. I think Babel just works for me perfectly because it's fantasy and it's also like something you can talk about, while I feel like it's literary fiction. I don't know, it's still good. We should not be pitting 2 queens against each other. What can I say? Like, these are 2 beautifully written books, and I do think Notes on an Execution is remarkably well done, perfectly crafted, and there's not one thing I can change about this. It makes you think so much. It's a beautiful thing. The 4th book I ended up reading this month, Good Girl, Bad Blood. This is YA thriller by Holly Jackson. You're following Pip in the aftermath of the first book, and there's a new mystery in this. I don't want to spoil the first Good Girl's Guide to Murder if you haven't read that. I ended up loving A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which is why I picked up the second book. The first one is such a fun time, especially if you love thrillers and like easy to read books. My favorite thing about this series is that I could read these books so quick. I sit there for like 20 minutes and I'm like 50 pages in. They're so easy to read. And after reading something so heavy and deep like Notes on an Execution, you need like a thriller palate cleanser, I guess, which is like so silly, but like I do think since the stakes are not as high because it's not as philosophical, where I do feel like actually reading Notes on an Execution almost made me appreciate Good Girl Bad Blood more, which is kind of silly, but I ended up giving Good Girl Bad Blood 4.25 stars. This premise is silly. A teenage girl solving murder and mysteries and missing persons and stuff. Objectively silly. I mean, police don't even solve 4% of their violent crimes anyways, so it's not like it's very realistic that a teen girl is just going to be able to like figure all this out, because human beings are so complex in that way. But I don't care. I literally do not care. If you have to critique Good Girl's Guide to Murder like series, keep that shit to yourself. That is, just say you hate fun and happiness, and everything about this is so fun. Like, I'm sorry. It's fun, entertaining, it's stupid entertaining. It's literally just like no thought, head empty entertainment, which is sometimes that's what you need if you're reading heavy stuff. I was sat in my seat. I was constantly reading this, like, so fast. I read this book in like record time. I thought I wasn't going to like this as much as I liked the first one. I ended up rating this one higher than the first one as well. This story follows a missing persons rather than the first book following murder-suicide, which is like, I'm sorry that I think missing persons cases are not as interesting as murder-suicide. Whatever that says about me and what I like to consume in true crime aspects, which is not really true crime. I don't consume true crime media. I only consume fictional crime media. And my fictional crime media, I think it's more interesting if a book character is dead. Sorry. But with that being said, I ended up enjoying this more because of the twists and turns that this book ends up taking throughout the overall story arc. I do think it's a lot slower starting out versus A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, but once you get past that overall hump of like the first like 25% of the book, you will be locked in, you will be sat. I'm telling you. I'm so excited to finish the series. I'm literally reading the third book right now, and chef's kiss, so much fun. I think Holly Jackson does a great job at doing characters. Like, her characters are so strong, even though that I feel like they're not super, they're silly little characters that are still feel so realistic, and there's so much depth to them. Even the subplot of romance is just perfectly done within the series, the way that you can feel like the relationship of them, where it's so subtle but so like there. It's perfect. I think these are like, obviously they're not perfect. There's probably so much you can critique about it, but I literally do not care because they are fun. I love these. I will probably promptly consume everything Holly Jackson has ever wrote once I finish the series. Like, she is keeping me. I'm sitting in my seat. I'm reading that book. I don't care. Holly Jackson wrote it. I said, yes, thank you. She could tie me up in her basement and feed me her little thriller twists and turns, and I will say thank you. I will look it up. Thank you, Holly Jackson. Everyone say thank you, Holly Jackson. And then my fifth and final book of this month, The Ministry of Time by Kalani Bradley. I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. I just don't know how to say people's names, apparently, which is why I read and I don't read out loud. This book I think would classify as like literary science fiction / romance. You end up following a woman who works for the British government. The British government has figured out time travel. Wow. This is the first we're hearing of it. This is a not so distant future. This woman is working, unnamed character. She has no name, main character, which is obviously can work really well, or it can be detrimental to your story. And in this case, I don't think it worked very well. But follow a woman who is working for the British government, and her job is to acclimate certain people from the past that are now living in the future and get them used to living in modern time, to basically prepare to live out in the future, and the future being modern times. So like learning how to stream movies and how to watch movies and how to listen to Spotify and all of those like type of things general people from like the 1800s and early 1900s just haven't known or experienced. Or like, so the other character, main male character of this book, Commander Gore, is a real man from real history who actually like disappeared and like died, obviously, because like that's what happens in real life, on an expedition. But then the book kind of reworks the canon of the real world, where the British government actually saved him and is now acclimating him to modern time. I think the premise is a little silly, yes. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I love books. I love silly books. I mean, what can I say? I think I was just going on for like 10 minutes about how much I love Good Girl Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. That is like silly, not even like anything crazy. I wanted this book to work so badly for me, and it fell so flat. I was honestly kind of disappointed because I loved the premise. I thought the premise was really interesting. Seeing a man from the 1800s trying to live and acclimate to 2024 society, pretty unique of a concept, I will say. I mean, obviously, like, we have time travel stories, and I think that's maybe why this doesn't work so well for me, is because it does not go into the science fiction lore, like, at all. And whenever I read, I prefer books. I'm not gonna say I hate romance. I don't hate romance. Do I prefer to read romance books? No, probably not. But I do prefer books to have subplot of romance. I like other things to be going on in the main part of the story with a side of romance. The Ministry of Time is a romance book with a side of science fiction. And I think if overall this was a flipped situation, this could easily be one of my favorite books. I think this book can work for certain people. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, so it wasn't my least favorite thing. It wasn't my favorite. It was just mostly disappointing because I kind of expected so much more, and then it kind of ended up just being mid. I think this book can work for people who love romance books, that prefer books that are like strictly romance, because I feel like this book ended up being mostly a romance book. It was too slice of lifey for me, and I feel like the plot doesn't kick in until the second half of the book, where I'd rather the plot be more overarching from the beginning of the book and reference more. The science fiction explanation of like the time travel and stuff like that doesn't work for me. I think it's really weak in that way. A lot of critiques of what I've seen this book to be, and I'm wholeheartedly agree with them, is it feels like a YN self-insert fanfiction. Like, literally. It's not a wrong comparison to make, especially because, like, I was in the trenches, middle school and high school. I read a lot of fanfiction. I was never big into your name self-insert fanfiction. Whenever I read fanfiction, and I'm going to tell you, I was not a Wattpad girly. I was not an AO3 girly. I was something worse. I was a quotive girly. You wanna know why that's worse? Because nobody fucking knows what quotive is, but it was the most niche and perfect society for fan fiction, and I can go on a whole rant about this, but I won't. Which is why I think maybe the Wattpad girlies and like that area of fan fiction, they could be really into this. Versus me, who prefers a different way of storytelling in their stories, where it's plot and things happening within the plot and the characters reacting to the plot, rather than just these characters living their life and then stuff is happening. Which is not necessarily fair to critique the book that way, I guess, if that's how I shouldn't judge a book for what it is or what it isn't. I don't care. I wish I wanted this to be so much more, and I feel like if it was just in that way where the science fiction aspect ended up being more focused on, it could have been a lot stronger. I don't think the banter between the characters were all that interesting. I don't even feel like they loved each other that much. I didn't feel fluttery butterflies. I don't even think the romance aspect worked out well, but I think that's just a me thing. And I think that's why this book, I think, is my lowest rated book this month, and it was the most disappointing. So I feel like that's pretty fair. But other than that, I mean, 5 books this month, that's a little bit better than a book a week. I'm not gonna complain, considering I didn't even start reading until halfway through the month. What more can you ask for? I'm definitely gonna try to aim to read more this month. But other than that, that's all you get from me. Goodbye!